Most people don't realize anything is wrong with their finances because, on the surface, everything appears to be working. The bills are paid. The salary arrives on time. Life feels stable enough to postpone deeper questions. And that's where the quiet problem begins. If you ask someone earning a decent income whether they feel financially successful, the honest answer is usually vague. They're not struggling, but they're not free either. There's no panic, just a constant sense that money moves through their life without ever slowing down long enough to change anything meaningful. This isn't a failure of effort or intelligence. It's a structural issue in how modern income is designed to be consumed rather than transformed. Passive income milestones matter not because they make you rich overnight, but because they interrupt this cycle in subtle, psychological ways most people never experience. Let's place this in a familiar setting. Imagine a 29-year-old professional living in a mid-sized US or European city. After taxes, their monthly take-home pay is around $3,500 or €3,200. Rent or mortgage absorbs roughly a third of that. Transportation, car payment, insurance, fuel, or transit passes takes another portion. Student loans or education-related debt quietly deduct a few hundred more. Then come credit cards, subscriptions, groceries that cost more than they did a few years ago, and occasional lifestyle spending that feels deserved after long work weeks. By the end of the month, there's maybe $300 left, sometimes less. That leftover amount doesn't feel powerful. It feels fragile. So it either sits in a checking account waiting for the next expense, or it gets spent to make life slightly more enjoyable now. The idea of passive income feels distant, almost irrelevant, because survival already feels optimized. This is where the first hidden financial mistake shows up. Not overspending, not laziness, not poor discipline, but treating income purely as a tool for maintenance rather than leverage. Most people assume passive income is something you pursue after you're comfortable enough. But comfort in modern financial systems expands endlessly. As income rises, expenses rise with it. The system is designed this way. Housing scales up. Cars get newer. Convenience replaces time. Passive income gets postponed indefinitely, not because people don't believe in it, but because it doesn't feel urgent or tangible. There's no immediate penalty for ignoring it. You don't miss a payment. Your credit score doesn't drop. Life continues. And that's exactly why this mistake persists for decades. To understand the cost, you don't need complex projections or investment jargon. Simple math is enough. Let's say this person could redirect just $200 per month, not through sacrifice, but through intentional redirection, into something that generates even a modest return over time. At first, nothing changes. The number is small. The income it produces is almost laughable, maybe a few dollars a month after a year. This is where most people stop. They see the early stage and conclude passive income doesn't work. But what they're missing isn't the math. It's the milestone. The first milestone isn't about replacing income. It's about creating proof that money can arrive without direct labor, even if it's $10, even if it's $25. That psychological shift matters more than the amount because it changes how future decisions are evaluated. The reason people ignore this milestone is deeply psychological. Humans are wired to value effort-linked rewards. We trust money we worked for because it feels earned and predictable. Passive income feels abstract and uncertain, especially in its early stages. There's also a subtle fear attached to it. If you start building income streams outside your job, it forces you to confront the possibility that your job alone might never be enough to provide real security. That's an uncomfortable realization. It's easier to stay busy, pay bills, and call it stability than to admit the system itself has limits. So people delay. They wait for raises, promotions, or the right time, not realizing that time itself is the most expensive variable in the equation. If this pattern continues unchecked, the long-term impact isn't dramatic collapse, it's quiet stagnation. 10 years pass. Income is higher, but so is dependency on it. Any interruption, a layoff, health issue, economic downturn, suddenly feels catastrophic because there's no buffer that exists independently of work. Passive income milestones are often framed as wealth goals, but in reality, they're stability milestones. The first one doesn't change your lifestyle. It changes your relationship with money. It introduces the idea that income doesn't have to be linear, tied exclusively to hours traded. Without crossing that threshold, even high earners remain financially fragile, and most never realize it until much later, when changing course becomes harder than it needed to be. Once the first passive income milestone exists, even at a level so small it feels almost symbolic, it quietly changes how people interpret their finances. Not emotionally, not dramatically, but cognitively. Money stops being just something that arrives because you showed up somewhere at a specific time. It becomes something that can be engineered slowly, deliberately, with patience. This is where the second milestone begins to matter, and this one is far less talked about because it doesn't look impressive from the outside. The second milestone isn't about how much passive income you earn. It's about what that income starts to replace in your monthly life. Let's return to the same professional, now a few years older. Their income has increased slightly. Maybe they earn $4,200 after tax now. Life hasn't gotten cheaper. Rent adjusted upward. Insurance costs crept higher. The car payment is still there or a new one replaced the old. But somewhere along the way, they didn't abandon that first passive income habit. They kept contributing, not aggressively, not obsessively, but consistently. Over time, that small income stream grows to $150, then $300, then $500 a month. Still not life-changing, still not something that pays rent. But here, where the psychological shift becomes irreversible, that $500 is no longer treated as extra. It gets mentally assigned to something specific. Maybe it covers the car payment. Maybe it offsets student loan interest. Maybe it absorbs the monthly credit card minimums that used to quietly drain cash flow. This is the moment most people misunderstand. They assume the value of passive income is in spending it. But financially intelligent people don't spend passive income first. They use it to neutralize obligations. The second milestone is reached when passive income cancels out a recurring expense that used to require active income, and the effect is disproportionate. Removing a $400 obligation doesn't just save $400. It reduces stress, reduces dependency, and increases flexibility in ways salary increases rarely do. A raise gets absorbed. An obligation removed stays removed. The system flaw becomes obvious here. Most financial systems encourage people to stack commitments as income rises. Better jobs justify larger homes. Reliable paychecks justify long-term debt. Credit cards smooth over volatility and make spending feel manageable. None of this feels reckless. It feels responsible. But what's actually happening is that future income is being pre-allocated before it arrives. Passive income interrupts this pattern by introducing income that is not already spoken for. And when it's intentionally used to erase liabilities rather than fund consumption, it changes the entire structure of a person's financial life. The math behind this is straightforward but rarely explained this way. Imagine a $25,000 car loan at a modest interest rate. Over 5 or 6 years, the interest alone might cost several $1,000s. Now imagine instead that passive income slowly absorbs that payment, not all at once but progressively. By the final years of the loan, your salary is no longer supporting the car, your system is. The same logic applies to credit cards. Most people focus on balances. Financially intelligent people focus on cash flow. Eliminating a $300 monthly drain has the same effect as increasing income by $300, but without tax, without negotiation, without career risk. Why don't more people pursue this second milestone deliberately? Because it requires delayed gratification without visible reward. There's no status attached to it. No one congratulates you for having your car payment covered by passive income. Socially, it looks identical to paying it with a paycheck. But internally, the experience is completely different. There's less pressure to tolerate bad work environments, less anxiety around unexpected expenses, more mental space. And that mental space often becomes the foundation for better decisions elsewhere. Career moves, investments, even relationships with money that are calmer and less reactive. If this milestone is ignored, the long-term consequence isn't poverty, it's permanent leverage by the system over the individual. Obligations accumulate faster than independence. Income grows, but flexibility doesn't. People become highly paid but highly constrained. Every decision must be filtered through fixed costs. Passive income, when used incorrectly, just adds spending power. When used correctly, it removes fragility. That's the distinction most people never learn, because no one explains passive income as a tool for subtraction rather than addition. At this stage, financially intelligent behavior looks boring. There's no rush to scale aggressively, no obsession with replacing the job. The focus is structural. How many obligations still depend on active labor? How many could be quietly absorbed by systems instead? This thinking doesn't come from motivation. It comes from experiencing the relief of the second milestone firsthand. Once a recurring expense is no longer tied to your time, it becomes very difficult to go back to seeing income the same way again. By the time someone reaches the third passive income milestone, their financial life no longer feels like a monthly survival exercise. It also doesn't feel like wealth, at least not in the cinematic sense people imagine. There are no dramatic upgrades, no sudden lifestyle inflation. In fact, from the outside, very little appears to have changed. But internally, the structure is completely different. The third milestone is reached when passive income doesn't just cancel individual expenses, it creates margin. And margin is the most underestimated force in personal finance. Let's stay grounded in realism. Our professional is now in their late 30s or early 40s. Their take-home pay might be $5,000 a month. They're more experienced, more stable in their career, and outwardly successful by conventional standards. But here's the difference. A portion of their monthly needs, transportation, debt servicing, maybe even part of housing costs, is no longer dependent on that paycheck. Passive income now covers a meaningful percentage of baseline expenses. Not all of them, not enough to stop working, but enough that the job is no longer the sole pillar holding everything up. This is where most narratives about money become misleading. People often frame financial success as a finish line, retirement, financial independence, quitting work. But the third milestone isn't about exiting work. It's about redefining the role of work. When income is no longer entirely linear, work becomes a choice layered on top of a foundation, rather than the foundation itself. That shift changes behavior in subtle but powerful ways. People negotiate differently. They take calculated risks. They invest in learning that doesn't have immediate payoff. They stop optimizing every decision around short-term cash flow. The math here is still simple. Suppose baseline monthly expenses, food, utilities, transportation, insurance, minimum debt obligations, total $2,800. If passive income covers $1,000 of that, the psychological impact is massive. Losing a job is no longer an emergency. It's a disruption, yes, but not a collapse. Taking time off to reskill becomes feasible. Turning down unethical or unhealthy work becomes possible. This is what real financial security looks like in practice. Not abundance, but resilience. Most people never reach this stage because the system encourages them to convert every gain into lifestyle expansion. A higher income justifies a better neighborhood. A stable career justifies a larger mortgage. Passive income, if it exists at all, gets treated as permission to spend more rather than dependence to reduce. And because these decisions feel reasonable in isolation, people don't notice the cumulative effect until flexibility has completely disappeared. Psychologically, the third milestone is difficult because it forces a reevaluation of identity. Many people subconsciously define themselves by their productivity and earning power. If income begins to arrive without effort, It challenges deeply held beliefs about worth, effort, and control. Some people respond by scaling aggressively, chasing more passive income as a form of validation. Financially intelligent people respond differently. They use the margin to simplify. Fewer obligations. More optionality, less noise. Ignoring this milestone doesn't lead to immediate failure. It leads to permanent exposure. Careers become brittle. Burnout becomes dangerous rather than inconvenient. External shocks, economic downturns, health issues, family responsibilities carry far more weight because there's no structural buffer. Salary becomes a single point of failure. And the higher the salary, the more painful that realization becomes because expectations have risen alongside it. At this stage, the behavior shift is quiet but profound. Financially intelligent people stop asking, "How much can I make?" and start asking, "How little do I need to depend on?" They don't chase freedom as an abstract concept. They build it incrementally through systems that absorb pressure rather than amplify it. The third milestone isn't the end of the journey. It's the point where money stops being the central source of anxiety and becomes a background tool, present, useful, but no longer dominating every decision. What's interesting is that once someone reaches this stage, their financial behavior often becomes harder for others to understand. From the outside, it may even look conservative or overly cautious. They don't rush into bigger homes just because the bank approves it. They're slow to upgrade cars, even when they easily could. They're selective about lifestyle inflation, not because they're depriving themselves, but because they now understand something most people never experience firsthand. Every fixed expense you add reclaims control over your future. And once you've tasted margin, you become protective of it. At this point, the system's incentives become much clearer. Banks, lenders, and even employers benefit when your life is tightly coupled to your paycheck. Long-term commitments create predictability for them. Mortgages stretching decades, car loans normalized as permanent, credit cards framed as convenience rather than debt. All of it reinforces a structure where income must keep flowing without interruption. Passive income milestones quietly weaken that structure. They don't overthrow it, but they introduce independence into a system designed around dependence. That's why these ideas are rarely framed as milestones in mainstream financial advice. They don't generate urgency, consumption, or profit. Consider how most people react to financial stress at this stage of life. With more responsibility, families, aging parents, higher social expectations, stress often leads to increased spending, not less. Convenience purchases replace time. Subscriptions replace effort. Small indulgences become emotional buffers. None of this feels irrational. In fact, it feels earned. But when passive income hasn't reached the point of providing margin, these coping mechanisms quietly erode resilience. Money moves faster, but pressure never decreases. For someone who has crossed the third milestone, stress is processed differently. Because not every dollar is already allocated, there's room to respond instead of react. An unexpected expense doesn't immediately require debt. A career setback doesn't instantly threaten housing. This doesn't eliminate anxiety, but it keeps it proportional. Financial stress becomes a problem to solve, not a crisis to survive. That distinction changes how people think, speak, and act under pressure. Psychology here is subtle. When your entire life depends on active income, the future feels fragile. You may not consciously think about it, but your decisions reflect it. You avoid risks. You tolerate poor conditions. You optimize for short-term certainty over long-term structure. Passive income margin flips that orientation. The future becomes something you can shape, not just endure. And ironically, this often leads to better career outcomes because decisions are no longer driven by fear. If this stage is ignored, the long-term cost is exhaustion rather than insolvency. People remain financially successful, but emotionally depleted. They can't slow down without consequences. They can't pivot without loss. Everything becomes high stakes because there's no buffer beneath it. This is why so many high-income professionals feel trapped despite doing everything right. They followed the rules, climbed the ladder, and yet still feel one setback away from instability. Passive income milestones don't prevent hard moments, but they soften their impact in ways salary alone never can. By now, financially intelligent thinking has fully shifted. The goal is no longer accumulation for its own sake. It's stability with flexibility. Enough income arriving independently to absorb shocks, support choices, and preserve mental space. Wealth stops being about comparison and starts being about control over time and attention. This isn't something that can be explained convincingly in theory. It has to be experienced. And once it is, it reshapes every financial decision that follows. By the time someone fully internalizes this way of thinking, their relationship with money becomes noticeably quieter. Not emotionless, not detached, but calmer. There's less urgency around optimizing every decision and less temptation to chase financial narratives that promise transformation instead of stability. This is where the real payoff of the three passive income milestones becomes clear. Not in net worth statements, but in how decisions feel day to day. Money stops shouting. It starts whispering. At this stage, financially intelligent people don't obsess over whether they've made it. They know that financial life is not a destination but a structure that needs maintenance. Passive income isn't treated as a victory lap, it's treated as infrastructure, something that quietly does its job in the background. And because of that, they become very cautious about disrupting it. Big lifestyle jumps are evaluated differently, not through the lens of affordability, but through the lens of dependency. Will this decision increase the percentage of my life that depends on active income, or reduce it? That question becomes automatic. This is also where a common misunderstanding deserves correction. Passive income milestones don't eliminate work ethic or ambition. In many cases, they sharpen it. When people are no longer working under financial pressure, they often do better work. They choose roles aligned with their skills instead of their fears. They invest time in learning that compounds slowly instead of chasing quick returns. The absence of panic creates room for long-term thinking, and long-term thinking tends to produce better outcomes, financial and otherwise. The system rarely rewards this kind of patience visibly. There's no applause for declining a bigger mortgage, no recognition for choosing margin over status. In fact, socially, this behavior can look like underachievement. Friends may assume someone is playing it safe or not maximizing their potential. But financially intelligent people understand that potential isn't just about upside, it's about survivability. A life that can withstand shocks is more valuable than one that looks impressive, but collapses under pressure. If all three milestones are ignored, the likely outcome isn't failure, it's permanent dependence on circumstances staying favorable. Continued employment, stable health, predictable markets, cooperative employers. That's a lot of variables to trust for decades. Passive income milestones don't guarantee safety, but they reduce the number of things that must go right for life to remain stable. And reducing dependency is one of the few financial moves that reliably improves quality of life over time. So the real takeaway isn't build passive income as a strategy. It's understanding why these milestones matter psychologically and structurally. The first proves income doesn't have to be linear. The second removes specific pressure points. The third creates margin. None of them require extremes. They require consistency, restraint, and a willingness to think differently than the system encourages. There's no dramatic ending to this story. No sudden freedom. Just a gradual shift from reacting to money to using it intentionally. And that shift, while invisible to most people, is what quietly separates those who feel financially trapped from those who feel financially steady, even when their incomes look similar on paper. If this way of thinking resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel. Not for answers, but for clearer questions about how money actually shapes modern life.